Recruitment agency looks like it just forwards resumes for a quick finder's fee. Find a candidate, make an introduction, collect a check, and move on to the next search. But the real business rarely ends the moment that candidate accepts the job offer. Most people assume a recruitment agency earns money simply by matching people to jobs. Send over a few strong candidates, the company picks one, the agency gets paid. That explanation feels reasonable. Sense-making is genuinely the visible part of the job. A company posts an opening, the agency searches, a candidate gets hired, done. It would make sense if that single placement fee was the entire business model. Companies pay a percentage of the new hire's salary as a one-time finder's fee. That fee is often substantial, sometimes reaching 20% of first-year salary. It seems like a straightforward transaction, one search, one hire, one payment. But most agencies do not survive on single, isolated placements happening once in a while. A single miss, a candidate who quits early, can wipe out that entire fee. If the fee alone explained the business, that risk would make agencies genuinely fragile. Successful recruitment agencies build something sturdier than a single transaction with a client. The real business sits in what happens before, during, and long after that placement. Almost none of it has to do with simply forwarding a promising resume. Most recruitment agencies work on what is called a contingency fee arrangement by default. The agency only gets paid if a candidate they present actually gets hired. No hire, no fee, regardless of how much searching and interviewing happened beforehand. That structure sounds risky for the agency, and in some ways, genuinely is. But it also means agencies can pursue multiple open roles across many clients simultaneously. Recruiter might be actively working a dozen or more searches at any given time. Only some of those searches will actually convert into a placement and a fee. The ones that do convert have to cover the time spent on the ones that do not. That is why the fee on a successful placement is priced higher than it might first appear. A typical contingency fee runs somewhere between 15 and 25% of salary. On a well-paid role, that single fee can be worth tens of thousands of dollars. Agencies prioritize roles and clients where the odds of a fast, successful placement look strongest. A role that is hard to fill, or a client that is slow to decide, gets deprioritized quickly. This creates a natural filter. Agencies chase the searches most likely to actually pay off. Volume becomes the strategy. More searches running in parallel means more chances to convert. A good recruiter is not just matching people. They are managing a portfolio of active bets. Each open search is essentially a small investment of time with an uncertain payout. The fee, when it lands, has to justify all the searches that did not convert. That is the real math behind why placement fees feel large for a single introduction. It was never pricing one resume. It was pricing the entire portfolio of unpaid effort. Understanding that math explains why agencies chase certain roles so aggressively and skip others. The fee is not for finding a person, it is for running the whole search operation. Most placement fees come with something called a guarantee period built into the contract. If the new hire leaves within a set window, often 90 days, the terms shift. Some agencies offer a full refund if that early departure happens, as a client protection. Others offer something different, a completely free replacement search, instead of any refund. That second option is where a quieter, second revenue opportunity actually starts to appear. A free replacement search still costs the agency real time, sourcing and interviewing again. But it also gives the agency another shot at placing a stronger, better matched candidate. If that replacement also works out, the agency effectively earned the fee twice over, for one payment. Some candidates who leave early do so for reasons that have nothing to do with the match. A slightly better offer elsewhere, a personal reason, a bad first week at the company. The agency is not necessarily at fault, but the guarantee clause still gets triggered regardless. That clause protects the client, but it also quietly protects the agency's long-term reputation. A client who gets a strong replacement candidate is far less likely to switch agencies. That retained relationship is often worth more than the value of any single fee. Some agencies structure their entire client relationship around consistently honoring these guarantees well. Reputation for standing behind a placement becomes a genuine competitive advantage over time. Clients increasingly ask about guarantee terms before ever agreeing to work with a new agency. That question has become almost as important as the fee percentage itself in negotiations. Agencies with weak guarantee terms struggle to win business against better established competitors. The guarantee period is not just a safety net, it has quietly become a sales tool. It signals confidence in the agency's process, even when that confidence occasionally gets tested. Handled well, a guarantee period turns an early failure into a stronger long-term client relationship. Every search an agency runs adds new names to something far more valuable than one placement. Recruiters build detailed databases of candidates, many of whom were never actually hired anywhere. Strong candidate who lost out on one role often gets contacted again for another. That database grows continuously, becoming a reusable asset across dozens of future searches. Sourcing a brand new candidate from scratch takes significantly more time than reusing a known one. Recruiter with a deep, well-organized database can often fill a role noticeably faster. Speed matters enormously in this business, since clients often need a role filled quickly. The fastest agency to present a strong shortlist frequently wins the search entirely, regardless of fee. That database advantage compounds over years, as an agency accumulates relationships across an entire industry. Recruiter, who has worked one specific niche for a decade, knows nearly everyone worth knowing. That network becomes almost impossible for a brand new competing agency to quickly replicate. Some established recruiters can fill certain specialized roles almost entirely from memory, without a single new search. That is not luck. That is years of relationship building turned into a genuine structural advantage. Agencies increasingly invest in software specifically designed to organize and search this candidate data efficiently. Well-tagged, searchable database turns years of scattered contacts into an instantly usable resource. This is part of why experienced recruiters command higher fees than newer entrants in the field. Their price reflects the depth of an asset that took years, not weeks, to actually build. When a recruiter leaves an agency, that relationship-based knowledge often leaves with them, largely intact. That is why agencies work hard to retain their most experienced, most connected recruiting staff. Losing one senior recruiter can quietly cost an agency far more than their individual salary. The candidate database, not any single job posting, is the agency's real long-term asset. Every completed search adds a little more value to something that outlasts that one placement. Not every placement is a permanent hire. Many agencies also place temporary and contract workers. In this model, the agency technically employs the worker, then bills the client for their time. The client pays the agency an hourly bill rate for that worker's time on assignment. The agency then pays the worker a lower hourly rate and keeps the difference. That difference is called the spread, and it is collected on every single hour worked. A worker might earn a set hourly wage while the agency bills the client noticeably more. That markup covers payroll taxes, insurance, administrative overhead, and the agency's own profit margin. Unlike a one-time placement fee, this spread gets collected continuously, week after week, for the assignment. A single long-term contract placement can generate far more total revenue than one permanent hire fee. That is part of why some agencies specifically favor building out their temp and contract staffing divisions. It creates steadier, more predictable revenue than relying purely on unpredictable permanent placement fees. Clients often like this model too, since it avoids the cost and risk of a direct hire. Ending a contract assignment is far simpler than a formal termination of a permanent employee. That flexibility is genuinely valuable to companies managing unpredictable, seasonal, or project-based workloads. Some workers eventually convert from contract to permanent, and agencies charge a separate conversion fee for that. That conversion fee compensates the agency for the ongoing spread revenue they will now lose. It is priced to make that transition fair for the agency, even as it benefits everyone else. Large staffing agencies often run permanent placement and contract staffing as two distinct internal divisions. Each division has its own pricing logic, its own sales team, its own client relationships. Some of the largest staffing companies generate the majority of their revenue from contract markups, not fees. The temp desk rarely gets the same attention in conversations about this industry, despite the revenue. It is quieter, steadier, and often more profitable than the flashier permanent placement side of the business. For senior or highly specialized roles, some agencies switch to a completely different pricing model. It is called retained search, and it flips the contingency model's basic risk structure entirely. The client pays the agency an upfront retainer before any candidate has even been identified. That retainer is typically non-refundable, whether or not the search ultimately succeeds quickly. In exchange, the client gets the agency's full, exclusive focus on that single search. The agency is not racing other recruiters to present candidates first, since exclusivity removes that pressure. That exclusivity lets the search move slower, deeper, and more thoroughly than a contingency search would. Executive searches often involve confidential outreach to people who are not actively job hunting at all. That kind of quiet, careful sourcing takes real time, and retained fees compensate for that directly. Retained search fees are often structured in installments, paid across different stages of the search. A portion up front, a portion at candidate presentation, a portion once the hire is finalized. That staged payment protects the agency's cash flow across a search that might take months. Retained searches typically command higher total fees than an equivalent contingency placement would. Clients accept that premium in exchange for guaranteed focus, deeper vetting, and genuine confidentiality. This model is reserved almost exclusively for senior leadership, executive, or highly specialized technical roles. The stakes on those roles are simply too high to risk a rushed, contingency-style search. A bad executive hire can cost a company far more than any recruiting fee ever would. That risk justifies paying a premium for a slower, more deliberate hiring process up front. Agencies that specialize in retained search often build reputations around specific industries or leadership levels. That specialization lets them charge a premium most generalist agencies simply could not justify charging. Retained search represents a smaller share of total placements, but a disproportionately larger share of prestige. It is the part of the industry most associated with high-stakes hiring, and it is priced accordingly. Large companies rarely work with just one recruitment agency for all of their hiring needs. Instead, they often sign what is called a master service agreement, covering multiple future searches. That agreement locks in fee percentages, payment terms, and guarantee periods in advance. It also often grants one agency preferred, or even exclusive, access to certain types of roles. Winning one of these master agreements can be worth far more than any single placement fee. It guarantees a steady pipeline of future searches, without needing to win each one competitively. That predictability lets an agency plan staffing, cash flow, and growth with far more confidence. Competing for these large contracts often involves formal proposals, presentations, and competitive pricing rounds. Agencies sometimes accept a lower fee percentage specifically to win this kind of ongoing volume. A slightly smaller fee, multiplied across dozens of searches a year, still adds up significantly. This is a very different sales strategy than chasing individual, one-off contingency placements constantly. It requires building genuine trust with a client's internal HR and hiring leadership over time. Once secured, these relationships tend to be remarkably sticky and hard for a competitor to displace. Switching a master service agreement to a new agency involves real friction and internal review. That friction protects the incumbent agency, much like inertia protects other subscription-style businesses. Some of the largest staffing companies generate a majority of their revenue from a handful of these agreements. Losing even one major client relationship can meaningfully affect an agency's total revenue for the year. That concentration is a real risk, but the steady volume it provides is usually worth it. Smaller boutique agencies often cannot compete directly for these large master agreements at all. Instead, they specialize deeply in a niche large agencies do not prioritize and compete there instead. The overall industry ends up split between a few large-scale players and many focused specialists. Both models can be genuinely profitable. They are simply built around very different client relationships. A single independent recruiter can build a genuinely profitable, if limited, business on their own. But the largest staffing companies operate at a completely different order of scale entirely. Hundreds or thousands of recruiters, organized by industry, function, or geography, working in parallel. That specialization means each recruiter builds deep expertise in one specific corner of the job market. Recruiter focused entirely on healthcare roles develops a different, deeper network than a generalist would. Clients often prefer working with a specialist who clearly understands their exact industry's hiring challenges. That preference lets specialized recruiters command stronger fees than a generalist chasing any available role. Scale also means shared infrastructure. One applicant tracking system, one compliance team, one training program. Those fixed costs get spread across every recruiter and every placement, lowering the cost per search. A large agency can also absorb a slow month for one recruiter using strong results from another. That internal diversification makes the overall business far more stable than any single recruiter's performance. Bigger agencies also invest more heavily in technology, sourcing tools, and candidate databases at scale. Those tools make every individual recruiter more productive than they could be working entirely alone. This is part of why the recruitment industry has consolidated significantly over the past several years. Smaller, independent recruiters increasingly get acquired by larger, better-resourced regional or national players. The acquiring company gains the acquired recruiter's relationships while adding its own infrastructure and reach. That combination often increases the acquired recruiter's own placement volume within just the first year. None of that scale story is visible to a company simply calling to fill one open role. It just looks like working with a recruiter who happens to be backed by a much larger operation. That invisible infrastructure is quietly what makes the largest agencies so difficult to compete against directly. It does not replace relationships in this business, it simply multiplies how many relationships get managed well. That combination, relationships plus infrastructure, is the real foundation beneath the largest players in the industry. This business depends on one quiet assumption, that companies will keep needing outside help hiring. In recent years, AI-powered tools have started handling parts of the sourcing process automatically. Software can now scan thousands of resumes and profiles far faster than any human recruiter could. That automation threatens the most basic, most time-consuming part of the traditional recruiting process. Companies have started building larger internal talent acquisition teams instead of using outside agencies. A strong internal recruiting team, supported by good software, can handle more hiring than it used to. That shift particularly threatens agencies competing purely on volume, contingency-based placements at lower fees. Job platforms and professional networking sites have also made direct sourcing easier for companies themselves. Hiring manager can now search and message candidates directly, without necessarily involving an agency at all. That direct access chips away at one of the core advantages agencies have traditionally offered. Economic downturns also hit this industry particularly hard, since hiring often slows first during uncertainty. Agencies built around high hiring volume can see revenue swing dramatically across an economic cycle. Some agencies have responded by shifting further toward retained search and specialized, harder to automate roles. Those searches require judgment, discretion, and relationship building that software still struggles to fully replicate. Others are leaning into their candidate database and years of relationship history as a genuine differentiator. A database built over a decade is far harder for a new AI-powered platform to instantly replicate. Regulation around gig work and contract staffing classifications has also grown more complex in recent years. Misclassifying a worker's employment status can create real legal and financial risk for a staffing agency. That complexity has pushed some smaller agencies to exit the contract staffing side of the business entirely. Client expectations have also shifted, with more companies demanding faster searches and more transparent pricing. Agencies slow to adapt to that transparency increasingly lose business to more modern, digital-first competitors. New staffing platforms built entirely around software, with far fewer human recruiters, have entered the market. Those platforms often charge lower fees, betting that automation can replace much of the traditional labor cost. Whether that bet fully works out for harder-to-fill, senior, or highly specialized roles remains unclear. None of these pressures are fatal to the industry on their own, taken individually. But together, they are quietly forcing agencies to prove their value beyond simply forwarding resumes faster. The agencies adapting fastest are combining genuine human relationship expertise with modern sourcing technology. Others are narrowing their focus, going deeper into one industry instead of staying broadly generalist. The recruiting industry is slowly shifting from a volume business toward a specialization business. Overall, staying profitable now requires being genuinely hard to replace, not just fast at forwarding resumes. So here is the real model, stripped down to what actually keeps a recruitment agency profitable. It was never simply about forwarding a resume and collecting one straightforward finder's fee. It is about running a whole portfolio of searches, since only some will ever convert. The guarantee period turns an early failure into a second chance at the same fee. The candidate database quietly becomes the agency's most valuable, longest-lasting asset over time. Temp and contract markups generate steady, ongoing revenue most people never associate with this industry. Retained search flips the entire risk structure, trading speed and competition for guaranteed focus. Exclusive client agreements turn one relationship into a steady pipeline of future searches. Scale lets the largest agencies specialize deeply while sharing infrastructure across every single recruiter. None of these pieces work particularly well in isolation. They compound across every single relationship. That is why an industry that looks like simple matchmaking runs on genuinely sophisticated economics. The resume was never really the product being sold from the very first search onward. The real product was time, judgment, relationships, and a database built over years, not weeks. Sourcing tools and internal hiring teams are starting to test how essential that value really is. The agencies that survive that shift will be the ones hardest to simply automate away. Everyone else sees a recruiter sending over a few promising resumes, nothing more than that. The person who built the agency sees a portfolio of searches, relationships, and a reusable database. That is the gap between simple matchmaking and a genuinely sophisticated relationship-driven business. Next time a recruiter reaches out about a role, remember what is actually behind that message. Years of searches, relationships, and a database most companies could never quickly build themselves. That history, not the single resume in your inbox, is what the fee is really paying for. The introduction was never the product. The years behind it always were.